Voice needs to show up in a really consistent way across every touch point. And we think very expansively about voice. It's a handy moniker, but we're thinking about, it could be dealing with people, it could be dealing with terms and conditions, it could be dealing with a product interface. All of that has to hang together, and all of that is voice.
This is Velocitize Talks, and I'm Eric Jones. I'm here with Howard Belk, who is the co-CEO and Chief Creative Officer at Siegel+Gale. Howard, it's great to have you.
Yeah, really nice to be here.
Tell us a little bit about Siegel+Gale and what makes you unique in the marketplace.
Well, we operate in the brand building space, and interestingly, this is our 50th year in business. I think that makes us unique.
Absolutely.
In the
advertising
marketing world, right? But really what makes us unique is the philosophy that drives the firm, which is simplicity. And that's something that our founder, Alan Siegel, who's one of the giants of the brand building world, landed on in the 70s. That's something that was a really important idea to simplify relationships, let's say, and that in doing so would strengthen them. So we've leaned into that philosophy in a big way because it's kind of more relevant now than it ever is when you think about the world people operate in and things like that. So it gives us a place to start, Eric. Every single project we take on, this notion of, okay, how can we simplify this so that people really understand what they're getting into when they engage with a particular brand, and from the marketer's standpoint, so they can distill their messages, their promises, their experiences down to the the essential core.
So going back, a decade, even more, brand firms were all about brand identity and that kind of thing. That evolved to, brand experience and sort of strategy work. Where is everything headed today and tomorrow?
Right. Yeah. Well, you're exactly right. I mean, and it probably goes back further than that. The branding business was the identity business. Let's see, how many places can we stamp our logo on in the most consistent way possible, and let the world kind of know what our footprint looks like. And today, brands are all about experiences, and it's what's unique, what's differentiated, what is absolutely spectacular about engaging with this brand, product, team, company, whatever. So what we go for, being the simplicity company, is looking for experiences that are, so crystal clear, so amazingly fun or pleasant or expected, that they're actually unexpected, and what we want is customers, users, consumers, after they engage with a brand, to say, wow, why doesn't everybody do it just like that? And that's kind of how simplicity can show up in experiences. But that's where brands are going.
As you think about that notion of simplicity, do you think that notion shifts from generation to generation? So if you're building, a brand experience for a boomer, let's say, how would you say that differs for something that you're trying to do for a member of Gen Z?
Well, one thing is, their lives are profoundly different. But we field this study. We're always trying to kind of quantify the value of simplicity. So we field a global study called the Global Brand Simplicity Index, and we poll over 15,000 consumers around the world in something like 12 or 15 countries. And we can slice and dice those respondents. And what we have found is across, any segment of age, income, any demographic you want, simplicity does matter, but it sort of shows up in different ways. So, and it kind of tracks to where people are in their lives. So with boomers, they're in their mid 50s if they're the last of the boomers, right? And the early boomers are 20 years older than that. So they're dealing with health issues, with different kinds of family issues, and they're buying different things, you know what I mean? And so a lot of the things they are buying are very complicated. If you're buying insurance, if you're dealing with healthcare, if you're dealing with just planning, that stage of your life, it's complicated stuff. So simplicity matters to them in a real big way. And it shows up, and it's sort of like, how do I navigate these complicated things, right? For Gen Z, simplicity shows up profoundly different. There it is, how transparent is this company? Are they really being straightforward in terms of the offer, the cost, the terms and conditions? And now as data and things like that become a larger and larger issue, are they being upfront and simple and clear with what happens to the data they get from me? How do they use it? How do they protect it? And things like that. So that's one of the big differences.
Startups are becoming more and more important across the spectrum, regardless of industry. It's not just tech. And they probably need brand help more than anybody else. And yet, paradoxically, they don't necessarily have, in all cases, the money to do so. How are you helping startups? How are you coaching them through the value of a brand, as they go for their Series B, C, whatever funding round? How are you actually even working with VCs to the extent that you are to kind of make them understand the importance of brand in the whole process?
Yeah, we do. We do work with startups. It's to be perfectly candid, it's not the bulk of our business. We work with kind of much more established brands. But we do get involved with some really interesting startups, and some, like, we've done work for Blue Apron, we've done work for Birchbox, we've done work for Blue Origin, Jeff Bezos' rocket company. So, we get involved with them. A lot of them are resource constrained, and resource in terms of any resource, money obviously, but time, people, talent, and things like that. So one of the ways we help them is figure out how to use what you have in the smartest way, and in a way that you're going to be able to build on it as your business takes off. So that goes, we'll help them distill that story, really understand their audience, elevate the parts of the value proposition that are going to drive preference and purchase, cut right to the chase, make the cash register ring. They have to have that happen if they're in that startup mode, right? Mm-hmm. But think about sort of a brand roadmap that as you scale, you can bolt new things on. As you're thinking about how to use media and various platforms to get your message out, and you don't have an enormous advertising budget, let's say, how can you think, in a really creative and clever way about to get your message out there and reach the right people? Some of those things. And then, of course, from a look and feel and design standpoint, how can you make sure that you're out there in a way that really stands out, that expresses what you're all about, and that is sort of pervasive across touch points.
I love that your panel here at South by is about artificial intelligence. And there you're talking about how brands can actually humanize their brand with AI and with technology. Tell us a little bit more about what you meant by that.
Where we're really going at was, it's a real risk if you don't, and I think, robots by definition, they don't have personality, right? They a lot of them are programmed to do one thing and one thing only, and to do it in a way that doesn't. Let's say it's not super empathetic, right? Mm-hmm. So if you're a brand and you're out there and you're starting to employ AI or robotics or anything like that, our view is you really have to think about how is that service going to land on your customers. And first off, is empathy going to be visible and present? Are they going to feel like, if it's not a human, at least it's somebody that kind of understands where they're coming from? The other really interesting thing is, there's sort of it's changing fast, Eric, but there's a finite number of technology options, right? And within a category, a lot of those brands are kind of looking at the same options, right? So if your direct competitor chooses the same foundational technology to fuel their AI, their customer service or whatever, suddenly your differentiation becomes a challenge, right? Mm-hmm. So that's where sort of time-tested brand principles come into play. How can we, in a sense, skin this AI in a way that reflects what we're about, that elevates, our promise, that speaks in our voice? So that becomes, the real challenge today.
I'm very intrigued about your thoughts on voice, and how you brand, on a voice shelf, let's say.
I'm glad you asked that question. Siegel+Gale actually came up with the concept of brand voice, and we actually trademarked that term. We're the first firm that ever recognized that, the way a brand speaks to the world and engages the world ought to be as recognizable as, a person's voice. And so we began with language, because this goes all the way back to the 80s. But now we think very expansively about voice and think of it as kind of the whole experience of engaging with a brand. So language is as important as it ever was. And there's new challenges when you think about the formats and the limited space you have to kind of use language. It becomes even more important. But we're also thinking about if you're engaging with a product or a brand across totally different domains, so online, in the real world, in a service, on the a service environment, on a call center, how do all of those,
and even Alexa, right, through these these various smart devices.
Yeah, exactly. There you've got an intermediary, so that poses a whole new challenge. Right. But so voice needs to show up in a really consistent way across every touch point. And we think very expansively about voice. It's a handy moniker, but we're thinking about, it could be dealing with people, it could be dealing with terms and conditions, it could be dealing with a product interface. All of that has to hang together, and all of that is voice.
You've argued that even with the speed of digital, it really hasn't changed much how creativity is leveraged. Can you expand on that a little bit and sort of discuss just the primacy of creativity, especially given our cluttered world and how everybody's, kind of bombarded by all sorts of, information and channels and things like that?
This issue of speed, it's huge, and it's largely driven by our clients and the pace at which they are conducting business, and sort of the urgency that surrounds the things that they're doing. So one of the great things about brand is more and more, companies and CEOs and C-suite, teams have recognized that one of the big levers for business success is going to be brand. So what happens? So they say, you know what? We're undertaking this great big strategic initiative, and we need people from we need, product development there. We need sales there. We need our legal team there. We need our talent team there, and we need our brand team there, right? So that's great news. We're invited to the party. Mm-hmm. Guess what? The party's moving fast, right? So the challenge for us is, if we want to stay at that table, we need to do the things that we do at an incredibly fast pace. I'm talking, 10 times as fast as we did them 10 years ago. So that's a big challenge, and it means that we have to do the things that we've done in different ways, and in a way, adopt sort of agile development processes and parallel path things that used to be sequential. And be very smart about retaining the things that we learn for one client in terms of technology or in terms of new developments and things like that, so that the high order learnings, not proprietary type things, we can use all that for the next assignment and build on it, so to enable us to move fast.
You've done research on quote unquote disruptive companies. And yet you've argued we should just retire the term, that essentially everybody's disruptive today. What do you think is the most essential ingredient for, a meaningful brand today?
We work with a lot of companies that have been around a long time, and they're in danger of being disrupted. But, interestingly, the ones that hire us recognize that, and they want to be the disruptors, right? Mm-hmm. And one of the CEOs of a client of ours recently said, we and our competitors are either, very purposefully disrupting, and that means moving towards experience and thinking about that, or we're unwittingly being disrupted. So that's, the savvy companies out there know that, and what they are doing is putting customers first. You ask, so what's the key thing? You really have to, there's so many ways to go forward, right? There's so many options that it can be daunting, and you can kind of go down some rabbit holes. What we've found is, and it sounds simple, and I guess it is simple, which maybe that's why we like it, is put that customer first. What are they trying to do? when they take a look at your brand, your product, your company, and make sure that everything that you do is in service to that. I love the story where Jeff Bezos, I don't know if it's legend or true, but I'm told that whenever they have strategic meetings about where are they going with the business or a product or a service, they have an empty chair at the table. Have you ever heard this?
Yep.
And that represents the customer. And I love that thinking. So we try to do that too in spirit, if not in practice.
Howard, thank you so much.
Yeah, enjoyed being here. Thanks for having me.
That was Howard Belk, co-CEO and Chief Creative Officer at Siegel+Gale.